At the end of World War II, Japan was a nation on the brink of collapse. The war had entered its sixth year. Resources were almost exhausted, and enemy bombs had already flattened many Japanese cities. In March 1945, the Allied firebombing of Tokyo caused a firestorm that killed over 100,000 civilians in a single night and left millions homeless. Everyday life for ordinary Japanese people was marked by food shortages, frequent air raid sirens, and the fear of an invasion. Propaganda urged citizens to make a fanatical defense of their homeland. Even school children were taught to desperately defend the country with wooden spears if an Allied landing occurred. Civilian morale was at its lowest point. Many preferred to think about death rather than a shameful surrender. As the months passed and the bombing and blockade tightened the ring around the island, our hero Tsutomu Yamaguchi watched his country suffer. In August 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was 29 years old. He was a family man, an engineer at Mitsubishi, and the father of a young son. His incredible story of surviving unimaginable tragedy sounds almost like fiction, but it is completely true. Through his fate, we will immerse ourselves in the final days of World War II in Japan, days filled with fear, destruction, and hope. Until then, his life was ordinary, daily work, family, and wartime shortages, until he witnessed the two most powerful explosions ever unleashed. This story follows Yamaguchi through two hells. First, Hiroshima, where history's first atomic bomb fell on August 6, 1945, and then Nagasaki, where the second explosion struck him on August 9th. Near the end of the war, a devastated Yamaguchi admitted he feared the uncertain future facing his family if Japan lost, anxious about the hardships of occupation. This profound anxiety was widespread. All across Japan, citizens quietly prepared for a dark era rather than accept the certainty of defeat. Meanwhile, Japan's military leadership refused to admit defeat, while the Allies threatened prompt and utter destruction unless they surrendered unconditionally. However, the proud and hardline regime in Tokyo chose to fight on, believing one more major battle would inflict enough American casualties to secure better terms, or at least a more honorable end. The U.S., on the other hand, wanted to end the war quickly. President Harry Truman faced a difficult decision: how to force Japan to surrender without huge Allied casualties. Projections warned that a full-scale invasion of the Japanese islands could cost over 1 million American soldiers, with untold Japanese casualties ready to fight to the last breath. In just a few months of fighting in the Pacific in early 1945, the Japanese showed terrifying determination. The resistance on Iwo Jima and Okinawa cost tens of thousands of American lives and hundreds of thousands of Japanese. Truman and his advisors sought a way to avoid the invasion and still break Japanese resistance. In this context, a highly classified American scientific project was about to change the course of history. The Manhattan Project, which gathered some of the world's greatest scientists, including exiled European physicists, successfully developed the first atomic bomb. Of course, using such a devastating weapon was controversial even among some American officials and scientists. Some suggested demonstrating the bomb on an uninhabited area as a warning, or continuing the conventional bombing and naval blockade. Ultimately, in the summer of 1945, the belief prevailed that dropping atomic weapons on Japanese cities was the fastest way to force a surrender. The die was cast. The first two atomic bombs, codenamed Little Boy and Fat Man, were primed for deployment. On that fateful morning of August 6, 1945, Hiroshima's 350,000 residents woke to a normal day, completely unaware of the looming cataclysm. The city had been spared from previous major bombing runs, targeted specifically because it was pristine, making the evaluation of the new weapon's power far more precise. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip. Along with two colleagues, he had spent several months working at the Mitsubishi shipyard. On the morning of August 6th, The three engineers were preparing to return home to Nagasaki. The rain clouds from the previous night had cleared, revealing a bright, sunny day. Yamaguchi woke up early, packed his bags, and headed for the train station. But around 8 a.m., Yamaguchi remembered something important. He had left his hanko, a personal stamp used in Japan as an ID, at the office. He decided to quickly run back for it, even though his train was leaving soon. This minor decision, trivial at the time, likely saved his life, putting him further from the epicenter. At exactly 8:15 a.m., as Yamaguchi walked near the shipyard, the roar of an engine echoed from above. Looking up, he spotted the B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, releasing two small parachutes. Drifting down was a scientific instrument, and though he had no way of knowing, little boy, the first atomic bomb ever used in war, carrying a devastating force of 15 kilotons. Suddenly, a blinding flash ripped through the air. Yamaguchi described seeing a great flash in the sky, as if the sun itself had plunged to the earth. Instinctively, he threw himself to the ground, or perhaps the force of the blast knocked him down. For the next few seconds, the world around him turned into white, burning fire, followed by a deafening roar and a shockwave. It felt as if something immense violently pushed me, and I completely lost consciousness, he later testified. The explosion threw his body, leaving him with ruptured eardrums, temporary blindness from the flash, and horrific burns covering the entire left side of his body. The skin on his hands and face was scorched, and his clothes were torn and burned. In a fraction of a second, Hiroshima was transformed into a fiery hell. Amidst the ruin, Yamaguchi somehow managed to drag himself to his feet. Around him lay a landscape of destruction never before seen by human eyes. Almost every building within a 2-kilometer radius had been wiped from existence, completely flattened by the crushing shockwave. A massive wall of fire followed. The ground temperature near the hypocenter reached several thousand degrees, igniting everything that could burn. Trees, houses, people, everything was consumed by fire. Fires broke out across the city, merging into a massive firestorm. The streets of Hiroshima were filled with an unspeakable sight. People walked in shock through the ruins, desperate to find safety in the sudden chaos. Later, in a documentary, Yamaguchi tearfully described the overwhelming devastation and the profound disbelief of the people around him. For those who survived the initial blast, a long struggle was just beginning. People called out for family members, many crying out in pain or wandering disoriented through the ashes of what was once a city. Black rain, radioactive, contaminated with soot and ash, began to fall from the clouds above, drenching survivors searching for water and shelter. Despite his wounds and shock, Yamaguchi managed to find a makeshift shelter. The death toll in Hiroshima was staggering. It is estimated that about 80,000 people died instantly when the bomb exploded, or shortly after from the force of the blast. Thousands simply vaporized, or their bodies were left buried under the ruins. In the following days and weeks, tens of thousands more would die from injuries and radiation poisoning. Estimates suggest that by the end of 1945, the total death toll in Hiroshima reached around 140,000. The exact number will never be known, as many were burned beyond recognition, and others disappeared without a trace. Hiroshima practically ceased to exist. A vibrant city turned into a wasteland of ruins and ash. Yamaguchi survived, but he was severely injured and in shock. He had only one goal in mind. They had to get back home to Nagasaki at all costs. At dawn on August 7th, battered, deafened, and with their burns bandaged, they managed to reach the outskirts of Hiroshima. There, he caught a train. By some miracle, the railway lines had not been completely destroyed. We can only imagine the scene inside that carriage. Wounded passengers wrapped in bloody bandages, survivors in deep shock, and others agonizing from severe burns, all while the train rumbled through a devastated landscape. Yamaguchi was in excruciating pain, but the thought of returning to his family gave him strength. After a day-long journey, late on August 7th, Yamaguchi arrived in his hometown of Nagasaki. Barely standing, his body wrapped in bandages, he made it to his house. His wife, Hisako, welcomed him in tears. She was shocked by his condition, as Yamaguchi was covered in burns and could barely hear or speak. He told her what had happened in Hiroshima, but how do you even describe such an event? He explained that an entire city had been destroyed by a single bomb, and that tens of thousands were dead. Few in Nagasaki could believe Yamaguchi's story. It seemed impossible that a single bomb could destroy an entire city. Despite his wounds, on the morning of August 9th, Yamaguchi felt a duty to report to work at the local Mitsubishi office. His wife begged him to stay home and rest, but he felt a sense of responsibility. He put on clean bandages as best as he could and headed to the office in Nagasaki. There, around 11 a.m., he sat down in front of his department director. Bandaged and visibly traumatized, he tried to explain the horror of Hiroshima to his colleagues. "A single bomb," he told them. "One device wiped out the entire city. Everyone is dead." His boss stared back in sheer disbelief, shaking his head. "That's impossible," he said. "The fever must be making you lose your mind. How could a single bomb destroy a city as massive as Hiroshima?" At that very moment, precisely at 11:02 a.m., a white flash illuminated the room again. A second atomic bomb had just exploded over Nagasaki, proving the truth of Yamaguchi's story in the most horrific way possible. Fat Man, a plutonium bomb stronger than the one in Hiroshima, about 21 kilotons, detonated over the northern part of Nagasaki. Yamaguchi was once again about 3 kilometers from the hypocenter, a similar distance to Hiroshima. He was instantly thrown to the floor by the force of the explosion. The building they were in partially collapsed, and the windows shattered to pieces. Curtains of fire and smoke soon rose over the city. Fortunately this time, his existing bandages and the thick concrete walls of the building protected him from flying glass and severe injuries. He was already wounded after all. He was in shock, but physically, he emerged relatively unharmed from the new explosion. Still, the radiation and stress took their toll. With his bandages scorched and no clean dressings left, he soon developed a high fever and began vomiting from radiation sickness. Nagasaki suffered a similar fate to Hiroshima. The bomb there was more powerful, but the city's geography, nestled in the hills, confined the scale of destruction to the Central Valley. A deathly silence settled over this city, too. In the Nagasaki Valley, where a vibrant urban center once stood, nothing remained but a scorched wasteland. Yamaguchi's wife and son were in the family home, just a few kilometers from the center of Nagasaki. When the flash hit and the ground shook, Hisako immediately grabbed the child and sought shelter in a nearby tunnel. Fortunately, both survived without serious injury, although they were exposed to radiation and were even caught in the infamous black rain. Tens of thousands were killed instantly. By the end of the year, an estimated 60,000 to 80,000 people had died in Nagasaki as a result of the bomb, including those who later succumbed to their injuries and radiation. Nagasaki had already suffered minor bombings before, unlike Hiroshima, but nothing could compare to this. In an instant, a large part of the city was erased. Thousands of families were wiped out, and survivors were left to wander through the ruins, searching for water and loved ones. Yamaguchi, his wife, and their child took shelter in a tunnel for the next few days, waiting for help. Finally, on August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito spoke over the radio in a trembling voice. In an unusually worded address, he announced Japan's surrender, citing the use of a new and most cruel bomb that had claimed so many lives. The war was over. For Tsutomu Yamaguchi, however, the battle was just beginning, a battle for survival and healing. Yamaguchi was severely injured and ill, but alive. In the weeks following the explosions, doctors in makeshift hospitals in Nagasaki provided what little care they could, bandaging his burns and trying to treat his radiation sickness symptoms. He suffered from a high fever, vomiting, and hair loss, classic signs of acute radiation syndrome. Yet, Tsutomu had a reason to keep living. His family had survived, and they were finally back together. In the ruins of Nagasaki, he and his wife, Hisako, managed to find a standing section of their home and set up a shelter there. As the weeks passed, he slowly recovered. His hair fell out, but to the doctor's surprise, his burns gradually healed, leaving scars but avoiding any fatal infections. The Yamaguchi family managed to rebuild their lives in post-war Nagasaki. Tsutomu worked for the American occupation forces for a time as a translator and later returned to the Mitsubishi shipyard as an engineer. Despite everything, Tsutomu Yamaguchi lived a long life. He reached a very advanced age, perhaps partly thanks to his strong pre-war constitution, and remained in relatively good health until his later years, with the exception of hearing loss in one ear, a consequence of the Hiroshima explosion. Tsutomu Yamaguchi passed away in January 2010 at the age of 93, having held off natural death for far longer than anyone would have ever expected.